Hello there. Welcome to Seeing Clearly with Charlotte Giblin. This is a series in which I will be sharing some of my experiences as an artist, telling stories, a little bit like my book of the same name, which I know helped me feel more connected to other people, less alone, and I know that some of my readers found the same. So I'm hoping that these monologues, not quite discussions, will give you some new ideas about your art practice, maybe help you to understand why you might be feeling some negativity towards the work that you're doing. I'm very interested in looking behind the veil, exploring what's inside and behind our need to paint, and as well other people's reactions to what we're painting. Now, you'll soon discover, if you haven't seen any of my videos before, that I am a one-take long-form girl. There are plenty of reasons for that, but the chief reason is, well, I feel it's really important to remove a lot of the cut and polish that we see with Hollywood, with so much social media now. And it definitely doesn't help with a lot of people's confidence. So I prefer to think of these as a one-on-one conversation, which is really how I operate best. You know, sitting down with you, having a chat over a cup of coffee, if only I had a coffee here, and really just exploring ideas over a relaxed period of time. They're not scripted, but these are conversations that I've had many times before. So I'm hoping there won't be too many gaps and stumbles. But I just feel that there's too much sort of fast editing happening these days. And if you're still with me this far in, you know, we have 30-second attention span and all the rest of it, then we're doing quite well. So today's theme is realism. And this is a very important and interesting subject for me. The context is this large painting of a tui, which is a native New Zealand bird. I live in New Zealand. I've just completed this painting in the window of Jane's Gallery here in New Plymouth. And for 2 months in the year, I sit in the window of their gallery and create these large paintings. And I've done it for about 4 years now. And over the last year, each of the times I've done it, I've changed my painting subject matter to realistic subjects. And the public response has been really, really interesting. This is not a new realization for me. I know that realism is a very popular art form, but I want to just look behind the layering of that and explore why it might be so popular and the inner conflict that that's created for me over time. It's a really, really interesting subject. Well, I think so. So, I mean, why is it so popular? As an art tutor, and let's go back to the basics of learning how to paint, learning how to change the way we see the world. So when I'm teaching, I chiefly teach realism. I think the foundation skills of understanding what you're looking at and how to recreate that is absolutely vital for any kind of art practice. Learning how to color mix. All of my courses, all of my videos, I use a very simple palette of primary colors. I think that control as an artist is really important. Having an understanding of your material, but chiefly being able to understand how the world is put together as a jigsaw of light and shade. I mean, you only have to scratch very gently beneath the surface to understand the analogy of that with life. But being able to step back and see our subject matter with a very clear, honest perspective of how things are is really, really helpful. So as an art tutor, I've always pushed for accuracy and realism. And I know that my students have benefited enormously from that, as have I. And as an artist going forward, I know that a lot of people who watch my tutorial videos might be beginners. They're looking for technical advice to recreate realistic images. And I wonder, why you are painting, why you do that. It might just be a compulsion. It might be something that you've always wanted to do. You might love color. For me, it has always been a way to focus my energies in on something tangible, something positive. As a teenager, I really felt the need to control the world around me when everything seemed incredibly out of control and distressing. Having this meditation, this focus on something creative was incredibly important. And I pushed myself to develop better and better skills. But I have to just pause and ask myself sometimes, well, why? I mean, why do we push ourselves, which can create quite a lot of discomfort, can't it? And just going back to young Charlotte, I was a very insecure, needy teenager. I don't think that's unusual. Maybe partly because my mum had some mental health issues, and I was able to be an emotional support for her. So from a very young age, I matured very quickly and was able to give my mum a great deal of emotional support. But that definitely left a huge gap of wondering still, I was trying to work out what on earth was going on and looking around the world and just feeling really alone and different and quite frightened. So painting and learning how to draw, as I said earlier, not only gave me a focus, but I discovered that I was good at it. And I could see how the jigsaw of light and shade fit together. I could, and by a lot of practice and study, I understood how to recreate something realistically. And I must have had some really encouraging art teachers at the time, although I can't actually remember how I discovered that I was good at drawing. It's one of those things that's always been with me. But then I started getting compliments, and not just from my peers, my people my own age, but from adults and from teachers as well. I really liked that. So I did more. I worked really hard at my art practice to produce more and more accurate renditions of objects to get more compliments. And it was fantastic. It gave me this wonderful sense of achievement, of reward. And I absolutely loved that aspect of it. And I have become very aware over the years of my art practice. And I didn't actually train as a fine artist. My background is pottery. So I did painting and drawing up until high school and my degree in ceramics, and then picked it up again about 12 years ago when I was working with doing some other different art jobs. So I've always worked in the arts and always had an eye for art and colour and light. But I never spent the time until relatively recently starting to develop that skill again. And I had to be very aware of the fact that I was still looking for acknowledgement, admiration and compliments through my realism. And that is one reason why I actually stepped away from it for a while. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to be complimented and admired. I mean, this is a completely normal, natural human trait to find somewhere we fit in and to feel valued and that we're good at something and we can get better at something. And you never, ever have to question anything which only makes you feel good. It's very helpful, however, to question things which start to create a negative reaction within you, even if it's, a little bit like in your stomach or a full-blown panic. And I was starting to get very panicky about doing different types of art. I really wanted to try some different forms of art, but I was completely petrified of losing favor with people. And that's when it becomes an issue, and you need to really look at, well, what is the point of me doing this art practice? Why am I doing this when it's actually generating an awful lot of distress within me? And I have had a real perfectionist streak, which I think was relatively unhealthy, trying to control everything a little bit too much and strive a little bit too hard. So from a viewing perspective, and I can relate to this because with my own experience of compliments and admiration as a realistic drawer, for the longest time, until really recently, until I was in my 40s, and I remember I've been working in the arts and run a gallery, and for this whole period of time, I believed that people who did abstract art only did that because they didn't know how to draw properly. That it was I know that's shocking, isn't it? But I know I'm not the only one. and so, but that was my own insecurity of looking at somebody's abstract art and maybe thinking, well, I'd really like to be free and be able to do that. But feeling that I couldn't, I was afraid, and I've been very judgmental about myself because I wanted to retain all of that sense of admiration. So I understand that anyone approaching realism, looking at it, if you don't have an understanding of art or haven't been an artist, there is definitely a sense of wow, like how can that person do this? And we have that with any kind of skill that somebody's worked on for a long period of time. If we can't do that ourselves, there's always a sense of wow factor. Well, it certainly is for me, watching anybody skilled at anything. And I think as well, though, for members of the public, it's a very safe area of art to admire and to engage with, because it's either right or it's wrong. And there are plenty of people who are afraid to engage with a more contemporary work or an abstract piece because they don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to feel stupid. And none of us want to feel stupid, do we? And there's a safety within this kind of work where people feel very comfortable that they can comment on it and enjoy how realistic the interpretation is. But one of the comments that I've heard from some artists, and this is really interesting, this is where it gets juicy, is the fact that the notion that is realism when you're working from a photograph, is it just copying? Is it actually real art? If this is not being channeled from an external source through the artist or from an internal source out, whichever way you think the energetic transfer and discussion works, is this just a display of technique and technical ability? Well, yes. Does it matter? Probably not. And on the subject of using reference materials, I have, just to the side here, always acknowledge the source photograph that you use. So you can see here, this is a fantastic photograph from my artist, photographer friend, Sharon Wright, who allows me to use her images for my paintings, which is just brilliant. And you can see this was the original photograph. I've removed the oranges. I've changed the color palette a little bit. I'm much more about the bright greens rather than the olive greens. And then I focused in on, there's the close-up of the bird. So I've made a few artistic decisions from a color palette stance. You always must acknowledge the source and get permission from the photographer if you are doing this kind of copying, particularly if the work is then going to be in the public sphere, and especially if there's going to be any money exchanged. You definitely need to sort that out. It's really important to acknowledge copyright. But the idea that it doesn't involve much imaginative power beyond, well, actually it doesn't involve much imaginative power at all, beyond perhaps changing the colour a little bit to suit my own tastes. And is that okay? Well, yeah, but it's a fascinating point to make. Photocopying. Some artists I've heard call realism, and this is not photorealism at all. There is definitely it's realistic, and I've always been completely wowed by utter photorealistic paintings. But I know a lot of artists who are very dismissive of that, and it's an interesting one to consider. So what I want to do is just show you a comparison painting and just talk about the difference between the two. So I'm just going to remove Mr. Tui, and you know I talked about being relatively analog earlier. Well, there ain't going to be no cutting here. This is a moving the painting out of the way. Who's got time for digital editing? I'd rather go for a walk. So let's get the beautiful Tui over here out of the way. I'm just giving you a moment just to take in this, which I think it just makes me laugh straight away in a lovely way. This, I had so much choice for the contrast painting that I could choose for this video. And this felt appropriate because it's almost completely opposite in color palette. There's no blue. It is autobiographical in a way that the Tui isn't. I mean, the Tui painting tells a story about me as an art tutor, as a painter who has learned a certain level of skill. And I've taken those color skills into this, the color mixing, a little bit of technical work with the palette knife. But this is telling an autobiographical tale. This is about hope. This is about choosing to look for the light, it's called turning to the sun. The idea of being inspired to face the light, to find the light while being aware of the shadows. It's about community, even though it's flowers. It's also very thick palette knife work, which I absolutely love, which is probably harking back to my pottery days, actually. And the trees, all those protecting branches, kind of magicking the light down. Trees appear in almost all of my paintings, as does the journey idea of choice. Now, this has been, what's the date on that? Oh, only last year, only 2022. I thought I'd had it for longer than that. But this will hang around for ages. A lot of my brightly coloured, energetic paintings do, whereas the bird paintings I do tend to go after a couple of months. Fantastic. Not complaining there at all. And that has been key for me to learn over the years about getting a balance, not actually rejecting the skill that I have in recreating something realistic, actually enjoying that. But I always found this kind of work more exciting and frightening because it's pushing me in a way that realistic painting doesn't. I know I can paint realistically because I've spent many years building up that skill and practicing, which is key. And that was a real point of frustration for me for ages. You know, why couldn't I do it all yesterday? We have this, another reason for the long form conversation is that we have this idea that everything can be done in 30 seconds and should be done in 30 seconds. And if you can't do it, you're a total failure. And I am so familiar with that feeling, that punishing of self for not being able to do things in the way that I imagine I should be able to do them, which is very dangerous. And I stepped away from realism for quite a while because I wanted to be slightly uncomfortable and to test my boundaries with people's responses and reactions. And although this, for me, speaks absolute volumes about who I am and what I want to portray to the world and the kinds of energy and hope that I would like to be able to connect in somebody else's house. I would love for somebody to feel, this hope and joy. I, as a full-time artist, I am not immune to the need to sell paintings and for some people to have very, very different tastes. And I'm really lucky that I enjoy working in a couple of different ways. The point of all of this is that, none of it matters, as I said earlier, if you only feel happy when you're painting. The danger zone, and I know so many artists who have found themselves in this blocked zone. It's when you don't allow yourself to make changes or to question why you're working in a certain way, or question those negative reactions. And if it's that you're holding yourself back because you're afraid of how people are going to judge you, which is a situation I found myself in, that can be sustained for a certain period of time before it starts to become really, really quite damaging. And yeah, it's really important to question those negative reactions, I've discovered, and to find the courage to paint something that speaks to you in a different way while still retaining an understanding of colour mix so you don't end up with mud, and the light and shade balance, which is really, really important. So if you've made it this far, then possibly there are some points here that have resonated with you and feel quite relevant. And for me, it's bringing to life the stories in my book, but it's that sense of knowing how important it is to connect, for artists to connect. It can be a very lonely kind of life. We need to do most of our work when we're on our own. And so many of these issues, I know years ago, it would have helped me so much to know that there was somebody out there questioning things in the same way I was, having the same self-doubt, but just to give a little bit of context and comfort and confidence to you, to be kind to yourself with your art practice, but really think about why you're doing what you're doing, what it means to you, and to celebrate the fact that you can do this. We are really, really lucky to have this kind of zone to be able to dive into. Okay, thank you. That felt really good to talk about, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Oh, there's lots of stories to share. Okay, see you soon. Bye.